Every business is a technology business now, whether you know it or not. And if you don't know it, that's a problem.
The first step should be research. Okay, you talked about employee experience. Speak to the team. What is frustrating on a daily basis? Where can we improve here? Where so many of these initiatives and projects go wrong.
If you're a company, right now in business, you want to stay competitive, you need to sit down and have a strategy around what you're going to do with AI.
One of the biggest issues I think we see with businesses, whether it's their ERP, their CRM, these other things, is their data is just terribly structured. It's not clean.
So that's where I see companies go wrong most often, is they go into something to do it because we should do it, not because we know what it's going to do if we do it. And that's a mistake. That's a problem.
Michael Fauscette is the founder, CEO, and Chief Analyst at Arion Research, LLC, with over 35 years in the high-tech industry. Formerly the Chief Research Officer at G2, he's an expert in AI, digital transformation, customer experience, and business software. Join us for our conversation with Michael Fauscette.
Welcome to the podcast, Michael. It's great to have you on finally. Great to have it all organized, and it's been a bit of back and forth, but excited to have you on. So welcome.
Thank you. It's good to finally be here.
Awesome. Well, easiest way to kick off, and normally how I kick off with each guest is just, if you don't mind sharing a bit of background for those that may not know you, those listening, and a bit about your career and how you've got to today as well.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I started in tech in kind of an indirect way. I was a liberal arts guy, and I decided to go into the Navy. When I went in the Navy, they went, "You'd be a great engineer," and I went, "What?" But along the way, I got involved in some computer testing, computer systems, software. So when I got out, it was just a natural place to go. So I went into the industry. I had a lot of experience in project management, so I kind of went in through the service side of the business. Worked for several vendors, including PeopleSoft in the mid to late 90s, Autodesk, early 2000s. I've been involved in 7 startups. And after Autodesk, I went to IDC, ran the enterprise application business there. That's where I turned into from practitioner to analyst. Then I ran a group of about 21 analysts covering all sorts of enterprise apps. Went to G2 as the Chief Research Officer. Spent 5 years there and still an advisor there. But then I left there to start my own firm, Arion Research, 3 years ago. Have
Awesome.
A couple of podcasts, Disambiguations, my AI weekly podcast, and another one called In the Hot Seat, and do a lot of research into AI and digital strategies, IT strategy, CX, stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, that's why we've got you on, because we can have a conversation about all those things. So appreciate it. Where we kind of, I think we align on a lot of things, but where we align on and what really brought me into your content and stuff to begin with was this digital first mindset. Something I've talked about for quite some time, and something we talk about with clients and others, when we're speaking to them, is embracing this digital first mindset and what that means and the importance of that. And I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of why adopting that digital first approach is crucial now more than ever, but it has been for a long time, but it's only going to get more important as well.
Yeah, no, I've been for several years, I've been really interested in buyer behavior. And when I was at IDC, I did a project for a client that got me really interested in doing these annual surveys on what did buyers really think. And I guess what I learned, was there was a big misalignment between what buyers thought they wanted and what we were delivering to them and how we approached them. So that sort of got me thinking about this whole digital transformation space. And I guess when we started using that term, I think I was a little bit, I know I was a little bit resistant, because I felt like companies have been digital for a long time. So I'm not sure they really understand saying digital transformation. But, I sort of think of it as modernization. And then, over time, as we evolved, I realized that what we were really trying to say was, as we went into anything, we really needed to focus on how you would approach this using the modern technology that we had available. And that's really being driven by this idea of customer expectations. They're different, right? They expect us to respond immediately and seamlessly and personalized. And, plus we have tons of pressure from the market. Agility is something you're kicked around, innovation. data-driven decision making. We have all this data available, but how do you actually use that for something? And then there's automation, intelligence, digital decision making kinds of things that lead to operational efficiency. So I think all those things kind of come together to go to be competitive and to really move your business forward. You need to have that digital first approach.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's something to see when working with businesses and in executives as well, is that a lot of it starts from, well, all of it really, not just a lot of it, starts from the top down, right? If the business from the leadership isn't bought into that, we're calling it digital first or modernization, then you're really doomed to fail. If you're, especially as if you're a middle manager or a team that's trying to implement something, trying to try out a new solution, you don't have the support of the leadership team, the executive team, then you're not going to get very far, right? But there's so much out there, so much available, but it just seems that, to me anyway, that a massive portion of this lack of digital first mindset, if that's the way we want to put it, is that there's just a lack of education with a lot of leadership teams, even from very small companies right through to very large companies, people that have done things for a long time in a certain way, and honestly really don't know what to do or how to take advantage of what's there, and so really end up sitting on the fence or continuing to do the same thing, therefore just, I suppose, staying stagnant. What your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's easy to kind of fall into a trap, and we came out with these cloud-based applications, SaaS applications, and also the approach for a lot of startups has been, and it's a logical approach. I mean, I've been a part of several that have done this. Is you start out in this little niche functionality, and then over time you add functionality. Well, sort of if you turn that on the other side, though, what that leads to is companies that have done nothing but silo their entire business because they've adopted all of these different technologies. Like I was talking to a CMO the other day, and I said, "How many tools do you guys use in your your marketing practice?" And he said 33. 33. And how many of
Wow.
those are integrated? Well, none. So, I mean, you can see where I'm going, right? There's a huge problem with data. And then we've also kind of gone into, we have all these new ideas, and cloud's great, except is it really the answer to everything? I think we're finally realizing that it's the answer to some things, but not everything. AI, machine learning, generative AI, all those things are really critical. Customer experience and having an end-to-end platform that does that, extremely important.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things come along. And then I guess the other thing is this sort of methodological shift. And I thought this was commonplace, but I did a consulting engagement a couple of years ago where I found out that, in fact, a lot of companies haven't looked at Agile and how to do Agile, implementations and methodologies, development, that sort of thing. And I think where you are right now, if you're not really iterating and improving incrementally, you're just going to fall behind.
Yeah, I totally agree. I personally think there's obviously parts and uh, of implementing pre-built or SaaS technology or other technologies out there, which is obviously a huge part of digital transformation, whether it's the ERPs, marketing softwares, whatever it is, but it's a big part of it. But I am a firm believer as well, is that the companies that are still around in the next 20, 30 years, even less than that, let's say 10, 20 years, are going to be companies that have differentiated themselves with technology, even though they might be a non-technology company. Now, every company these days has some form of technology, or they are using computers or ERPs or whatever else. But there is, especially in blue collar industries or more traditional industries, there is a massive lag behind in what we would call non-technological industries. But those people are going to be forced to deliver using technology. And that's, to me, I see it's a huge opportunity, but also a huge risk at the moment, where there's people that, again, when we look at it in our world, it's kind of basic to have these systems in place. We've already mentioned an ERP, there's other things, a website, other systems, etc. But that's really that should have been standard 10, 15 years ago, right? You might be on your third, fourth, fifth, sixth iteration of that. But what are you doing to actually bring all these things together to deliver a differentiated customer experience, or something that actually separates your brand, that not, is not just available off the shelf for everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that every business is a technology business now, whether you know it or not. And if you don't know it, that's a problem. And
Yeah,
I think some of this is really just being intentional about what you do. I want to have an AI strategy. I want to have a data infrastructure strategy. I mean, I can keep going, but you get the idea, right? I want to have done those things intentionally, and at the same time done all the things underneath it that help my company, my employees actually make that transition, right? I want to be clear about a vision. I want to explain why it's good. I want to, use change management, all those things. We got to think of the company, as a part of this whole process, and how we move it into that mindset, that digital first mindset.
yeah, definitely. And getting into, we've touched off on it a bit already as well, but like AI is, we won't say come out of nowhere, because it's been around in for a while, in especially in the technology space, etc. There's the people on one end of the spectrum that say it's completely overhyped. There's other people that say everyone's going to lose their job. I'm sitting somewhere in the middle. I think there's some incredible use cases for it. There is also some what really seems stupid use cases that are getting applied, etc. But either way, it's not getting any worse, and that's one of the common things you see with people that are what's the word, are lagging on it, or kind of sitting on the fence. It's like, well, it's only getting better. So you may not even be doing something right now, but how are we bringing this into, whether that's even training our team to be more efficient with it, using it, etc. But then on top of that, are we looking in the next while as to how we're bringing this to customers? And again, coming back to more of those traditional industries, it's going to be to the point where, okay, you might be a manufacturer. We'll get into this a bit later where we're discussing, but you might be a manufacturer where, okay, you could use AI in finding efficiencies, predicting stock levels of purchasing, etc. But how are you then even bringing that to a customer level where they can, people just say, oh, it's just a chatbot. Yeah, but the technology that we have available these days it can be so much better than that, than what was available a couple of years ago. So I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of customer experience as a whole for businesses embracing that digital first mindset, and then kind of an example as AI has really pushed us forward in that, and that's just one part of it.
Sure. No, I think, I think part of this whole idea, and I said this inside of that idea of digital first, I really do say that if you're a company, right now in business, you want to stay competitive, you need to sit down and have a strategy around what you're going to do with AI. And I challenge, first of all, you have to separate traditional AI and generative AI, because we hear a lot of hype today about generative AI, but we don't really talk much about traditional AI. But guess what? You've been using that for years in your business. I mean,
Yeah.
you do lead scoring. Well, guess what? That's AI. I mean, all these things that we've had. So you are actually using AI. And the other thing, I guarantee you, if you walk through the marketing department, you will see ChatGPT open on a whole bunch of desktops. So you may not have an AI strategy, you may not be using AI, but I guess that you probably need to look around, because you are, right. And
Yeah.
and it's important. It's really important to tie this together, because why? Well, I said customer expectations have changed. Well, if I'm using AI, I can move into a world where I can personalize the experience in a much better way. I can and make the company be able to individualize in a lot of ways, a scalable solution to offer you what it is you really want, you individual, right? Not just a segment. And then I can change my customer support. I can make it, hybrid. I can have these chatbots that are in fact conversational, that aren't
Yeah.
just logic tree driven, but can actually answer your questions. And when they don't, they are built in a system that then passes it to the human agent, and the human agent deals with that. I think all these things are really important. But you asked like examples. I was interviewing somebody yesterday for my podcast, actually, and they're from a company called Customer. They do service desk kind of software, and this person runs their technical support, so they're using their own tools. But the point was, what he had done with his organization was really innovative in a lot of ways. First, they now have a smart chatbot that is a part of a hybrid system that lets them interact in a way that is, consistent and deal, and they end up with a lot of customer problems that are dealt with up front versus having to, go through a process of that, human agent research, all those different things. They're using the data they collect from that to build out predictive analytics so that they can start to be proactive in their customer service. So instead of reacting every time to a problem, they're sending notes out to customers to go, hey, you need to implement this new patch because this is a problem that we've identified. You haven't seen it yet, but you will, and so we'll solve it before it happens, right?
Yeah.
Or virtual assistants, they also have given all of their agents virtual assistants so they can ask that assistant to help them find the answers in real time, which just makes them more productive and makes them head off the problems with the customer in a much better fashion. And their CSAT scores, everything's going up. I mean, that's that is a great kind of comprehensive way to think about going into this and using the AI technology.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's an amazing opportunity for businesses that can take advantage of it, whether it's using it to be more productive, more efficient, as we said, or bringing it into your own technology. But kind of moving into, we discussed manufacturing a bit, and I know you've got some experience in this, and we've discussed AI. But even out of that, before getting to that level of AI, and I know especially executives or leadership teams that are like, oh, well, I don't know nothing about this, or I'm scared of technology in general anyway. Like AI is a big step, but even without that, there's so much that can be done with in-house solutions that are built, whether it's operating software to build more efficiency out in your pipeline, QA control, whether it's delivering real-time insight into, we're talking about manufacturing here, but into a business, or to give your customers real-time insight into where their product is at in the manufacturing process, 3D configurators, augmented reality configurators, wholesale, we're talking customer portals, etc. So many of these things which are digital-led initiatives are, most importantly, our first step into this digital-first mindset that even I would say, the majority of businesses haven't nailed yet, right? They may have tried something, but it's been implemented as like a silver bullet, let's call it that, right? Where it's like, oh, we can launch it and it's done, and we're all good, awesome. It's going to generate us a heap of sales, rather than again identifying it as, okay, no, this is our differentiation. This is the future of the business. So we're going to invest in it and we're going to continually improve it like it should be. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that. I know it's a bit of a loaded question, but overall, how when we're pushing these initiatives, it's a continuous improvement thing. It's not a one and done, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is, and that's part of the reason that I talked about this, agile approach or iterative approach, because I think that is, in fact, the key to this, and building this intentional strategy that covers off, all the different parts of your business and how you want to use digital technologies, how you want to use AI, particularly in an AI strategy. But then you're not gonna implement this in one fell swoop, right? You have to think about it as incremental improvement over a period of time. Why? Well, because you've got to bring your people along, you've got to make sure your data infrastructure is correct, you've got to integrate all these things in. And one of the things that I've seen today a lot is we're kind of lost in the productivity side of using AI, and generative AI that's one of the reasons why, right? Because it does make you more productive. But the problem is that it's very isolated, and it also puts undue pressure on your employees, right? Because look, here's a new tool, Julian, you're going to be 4 times as productive, and I'm going to monitor and make sure you are. Well, how does that feel, right? It doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
So we've got to think of this more in systematic ways. It's a systematic process that has places for AI to play inside of it and people to play inside of it. And I I think when you use AI, you have to think of it like, okay, what are the things we can do that we can automate, generative AI particularly? Then what are those things that we want it to do that we need to keep an eye on? So that's human oversight. And then what are those things that we don't want the AI making a decision? And for example, in healthcare, do I want the generative AI engine deciding which, cancer I have? No,
Yeah.
but I want it telling the doctor which cancer I might have and having the doctor make the decision. So human in the loop. I think if you think of those things as you're going into this and you're doing all this in an intentional, planned way, you can really see advantage across your business.
Yeah, definitely agree, and I totally get your point about the the productivity with AI. But in a thing that we are talking about overall, if implemented correctly, will eventually lead to productivity, right, and
Yeah. Oh,
efficiency
yeah.
gains
Yeah.
and profitability. But if that's our only aim, then we're probably using it the wrong way, or putting we're probably like it might take time to get to that point. Is
Right.
essentially what we're trying to
Right.
say, right? And if we're expecting that from day dot, then again, it's that continuous improvement thing. And it was talking about implementing a portal or whatever it is, right? Maybe a QA, a system or something like that there. But it comes back, I like how you just put that simply, is that, okay, what are we trying to automate here? What can we automate completely and what can we automate with human oversight? Whether it's AI, whether it's utilizing kind of more traditional technologies, or we're just simply engineering something. There's so many opportunities there for businesses. And essentially the way I did describe it when I'm working with clients is like, okay, it's not about just everyone losing their jobs and we're just going to replace everyone. That's not the point. How do we automate the things that we can and then utilize the humans or our team where they are better? And again, it's just going to enable more ideas. It's going to enable more productivity. It's just everything is going to be better. And so we've come a bit to data, or we've mentioned data quite a lot. And I think this is important for AI, but also just in general. One of the biggest issues I think we see with businesses, whether it's their ERP, their CRM, these other things, is their data is just terribly structured. It's not clean. What are your comments on that?
Well, first of all, yes, you're correct, and it's for a bunch of different problems, right? We silo the data in lots of different applications because we enabled people to bring in their favorite application, and in the cloud, it's very hard for us to manage some of those things. People have gone around IT for years, but it's more now because there's so many things they can use. I mean, all those things kind of create a bit of Wild Westness. And what we have to do, and this is, if you ask me what's the first thing to do when you're making this digital first strategy or your AI strategy or any of those things, it's have a data strategy, a data management strategy that spans your entire company. And that means, how do I put together the data picture in my business with the data that I have and the data that I can augment that with or enhance it with, and use that across all my systems. And we've moved into a place where there are a lot of really good tools. So we're not talking about how do I put everything in a single data lake anymore. We're talking about how do I connect all these things together. Some of those things will be in a data lake. Some of them will be in other applications, but it has to be an infrastructure underneath that is connected and managed. And then using all these new AI tools, there's a bunch of new data tools that are available that can help you make sure your data is the right quality. When you don't have the right data, it can create synthetic data so that you do have data to use for training. When you are using this with generative AI and a large language model, how do you protect that data? How do you protect PII? How do you meet regulatory issues in GDPR and CCPA, other things? So I think that's the start. That's the foundation. And once we've gone into that and built out that infrastructure, then you can start to layer on top all these other advanced capabilities.
Yeah, I totally agree. And having that ecosystem, that business ecosystem, like a closed loop, right? But whatever systems you are using, it doesn't mean that every single system is integrated completely where every single bit of data is shared across, but it is super important that whether we have a data lake or a data warehouse, or whether it's a single source of truth, whatever it is, that there is that source of truth somewhere where we get the most complete picture of our data. Because again, when we're talking about whether it's building out portals, whether they're building out job management software, whatever it is, it comes back to our structure of our data, right? Even just from an engineering perspective of how well we actually architect that, how well we integrate things. And then especially when we start talking AI and everything else, is that is all going to be trained on that data. So if you're talking about using a chat bot or something for a portal or whatever for customers that you're delivering, okay, where's the database? Where's the indexing that we can do on that actual data? Where can we train that so that's available automatically for the customers? So I think that's a very important part of the process. And what do you think about AI in manufacturing specifically? I think you've done a report on this recently, or you did some work on it.
Yeah, no, I've been looking at this off and on for a bit, and there's some really cool things that can impact there. One thing I would add in the data piece that just popped into my head too, that you don't actually have to move all your data into one place either. In the new platforms, we have the capability to federate that data and have usable data across the business that you aren't necessarily moving everywhere, which is a part of the innovation, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, manufacturing. I mean, there's a ton of opportunity in manufacturing, and I think you can start with the design process, and you can move across your shop floor processes, and into logistics and supply chain. There's in design, for example. I didn't mention this before, but I sort of hinted at it when I said synthetic data. There's there's a capability to do digital twins that can let you test and QA products in a safe environment first before you actually produce that product, and save lots of money in the design process. Also, be much more innovative and get to the end state that you want. And that technology has lots of implications across the business, all the way from synthetic customers that you can test things on, to synthetic organizations where you can use when you're doing decision intelligence and that sort of thing. But it's very important in the design process. Then if you move into the shop floor, when I started, one of my first jobs in tech was managing projects that we would have called them plant maintenance back then, but I guess it's enterprise asset management in the fancy terms that we use today. But the idea was, how do I maintain all this stuff and make my factory work? Well,
Yeah.
now we have the capability to go into this and do predictive maintenance. So we're not doing break fix. So we're not waiting for it to break before we go fix it, or we're not changing out things on some regular basis because we think it might break. We're actually predicting when it will break, and then we can fix it before it breaks. I mean, how important is that? That means that you can minimize downtimes, you can control downtimes. I mean, all those things are extremely important. Cost reductions by supply chain optimization, by energy management, by error reduction. I mean, there's all these areas that you can apply this technology to inside of manufacturing, all the way down to we're starting to see robotics and much bigger use cases for that. So there is a lot of opportunity in manufacturing.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And an interesting area for me is even just QA checking, whether it's bringing in robotics or visual delivering visual data into AI as well, and training that on quality. But then even that all aside, and I know for some of those listening, they'll be like, okay, this is way above where we already are. Okay, implement these things without AI, right? So for example, get the technology into the hands of your shop floor staff, right? Like, how do we do that, right? So we might be doing QA checks paper-based now. We might be doing it manually, right? We might even not be doing them, right? We might not be tracking across the shop floor manufacturing process in different areas. How long is it spending in each stage? Where's the inefficiencies, right? So many of these businesses don't even have that data, right, to begin with. So firstly, we've actually got to capture the data, right? Like, we've actually got to get that into the hands, most importantly, of the shop floor. And you start talking about logistics and optimizing routes, right? When we're delivery routes and all that kind of thing with customers, etc. There's just so many opportunities. It can honestly feel overwhelming, right? I'm sure you've had that when you're working consulting or working with clients. And so what would you recommend that, what's a good place just to start that you think for a business here? Where would you recommend someone start?
I mean, if I'm in manufacturing, I think, there are a couple of big opportunities. One's in the design process, which I mentioned already, and I think you can look from a systematic way there. What can I do to improve that and be more innovative? Shop floor obviously offers a lot of opportunity. You mentioned, how do I get the technology in the hands of the people in the shop floor, and who are actually doing the manufacturing? I mean, you've got all sorts of opportunities with mobile devices now that you wouldn't have had before, that you can use to push data to them and have them interact and understand the situation, or even down in the supply chain. And I'm not so sure that wouldn't be one of the best places to start, because there's so many opportunities, and we have had so many issues with supply chain disruptions over the last several years, that if you think of going into this with a combination of a system, a data based approach to this, some Internet of Things types of sensor use to make tracking, tracing, authenticating, provenance, all those kind of things you can do with your materials, both from a supply in and a shipping, logistics out. There's huge advantage in that area that you could glean and get some real big savings out of, and some real productivity improvements and some customer improvements. How do I make sure I'm getting the right thing to the right person at the right time? All those things that really give you opportunity there. So I think, across the business, there's opportunity, but supply chain might actually be one of the bigger ones to start with these days.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think for me, some practical advice for anyone listening as well would be, like, sounds cliche and stupid, but or obvious, maybe not stupid, but obvious, is the fact that what are the biggest issues with customers right now? What are the biggest inefficiencies? Right, everyone knows that. When you sit down and write it down, what are causing us problems? And we've had clients that have got paper-based systems or paper-based reporting or things like that there, where you find out that they're spending an awful amount of time on these reports. And it's like, if we just structure the whole process properly and capture the data on the floor efficiently, we can literally save massive amounts of time. Not only just time and increase your profitability, obviously that's part of it, but all the other benefits. Now we've got the data in a structured way, and we can do so much more with it, right? We can then deliver that in real time to the customer. We can now QA more efficiently, right? We can learn from that data, right? We can predict other things. Like, so much of this comes back to, okay, what are the problems? And then designing a solution that captures that data in a structured way. And I think, would certainly recommend to anyone listening is that start with, be like the productivity hack, but eating the frog, right? So start with the biggest thing. Like, well, what's the what's causing us the most pain at the moment, and just imagining, like, okay, if we were to solve this, what could a solution look like? What would we need to change? And so strategically, from an executive or leadership position level, and then coming back to kind of what we discussed at the start, this is linking a bit to that digital first mindset, looking at ways that, okay, how do we solve this with technology, or modernization, as you called it? What's your advice to those teams on taking that first step if they feel that they haven't? Right? How would you advise those teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it really does start with an intentional digital first strategy that encompasses this idea of AI. But AI is not the end result, right? I mean, and I think you're correct that as a part of that strategy, I have to look for and identify and dissect those pain points. Is it customer that's the big issue? I'm sure those will be part of the problems if you look at your business, in an honest, open way. But I also bet that you have some real opportunities from an employee perspective to use these technologies and improve their experience, which, of course, as we know, gets passed down once employee experience and customer experience are linked somehow.
Yeah.
And we have to understand that. And then understand your market dynamics and your competitive position too. Like, are there opportunities to be more innovative? Are there opportunities to build out some way to understand the voice of the customer and build that back into your product process or to your supply chain process, whatever that might be. But I think that's that look into building, laying it out, and then working through a process of change management to do that and implement it in the right way. And I like to think of it in a maturity sort of model to process, right? So I have this, base level where I'm not really doing anything intentional. Most companies are actually in a level where they have a lot of technology coming in through the bottom, but not top down or not being supported by the business. And then once you move into that executive sponsorship world, you can drive into a much more mature approach to using it. And then eventually into that systematic approach that I mentioned, that is, looking at my business processes and putting the right digital tool in place in each of those to get the outcome that I want, whether it's AI based, it's generative AI, it's machine learning, it's, a combination of those things, computer vision, natural language processing. I mean, all these things are important, and, but I have to tie them all in that evolution of the business to get to that more intentional strategy and executive sponsored position.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. One of the things I am very passionate about and speak about a lot is like with any of these initiatives, so digital initiatives, what do you want to call it, transformation, modernization, but any project or initiative that we're embarking on, the first step should be research, right? The first step has to be, okay, you talked about employee experience, speak to the team, right? Speak to the input. What are the issues, right? Where can we get the biggest value, biggest return on investment without going and just so many of these projects and these things fail. They're like, oh, we implemented a new ERP. It was a terrible idea. We wish we'd never done it. Or we started out this new portal project, or we did this, or we tried AI. And it's like, okay, no worries at all. But what research did you do? Oh, none. We already knew what we needed to do. That's the problem, right? There's the problem. And I'm so passionate about it. Of like research. And if we're going to do something for the customer, speak to the customers, find out, okay, we feel this is a problem. Is it as big a problem for you? And if not, where should we focus? What would you want us to do? Where should we be putting our time, our investment? Same thing with the team or whatever it is. Okay, speak to the shop floor staff. What is frustrating on a daily basis? Where can we improve here? Right, and they have much more knowledge. They're on the front lines, if that's the way we want to put it. They know much more than as a leadership team or executives of real daily problems. And it's just silly, like ignoring that feedback and that research. And that's, in my opinion, doesn't mean it's correct, but is where so many of these initiatives and projects go wrong. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely correct. And then I would add that, now we're moved into a world where we do have some really unique ways to capture and use voice of the customer, voice of the employee. And I think that's a critical piece of this digital first strategy, is how is it that I systematically capture customer feedback, prospect feedback, employee feedback, and how do I then build that into a system where we enhance that with whatever other data we have that will make sense. I mean, maybe it's socially collected data about those customers or about the employees, whatever. But how do I use that? And now we can use technology, AI particularly, to help us dissect that and use the data in ways to build better products or to improve my support process or proactively solve problems or give more assistance to employees, whatever that outcome needs to be. But I'm doing this in an outcome based way because I've been able to collect all this data and use it in a way that helps me inform those decision processes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And a big thing that we push or we say is around the fact of like how do we, and use this as a figure of speech, but 10x, 100x without adding overheads, right? And that is we might not get there immediately. We might have to add more or may have to put investment in to begin with. But the aim is like, how do we do more with less, but better quality, right? It doesn't mean, cutting the team in half, cutting the whole team. No, but we're redeploying that talent to better areas, into other areas, because now we can do this particular part of it much better.
Yeah, I mean, I give you a simple example. I mentioned customer before. One of the other things that I got out of that conversation yesterday that I love is the fact that he's not that they're not focused on, oh, we've added all this capability to automate the process and deal with a lot of customer issues using automation, using a chatbot. So I don't need as many agents. No, that's not what he did at all. What he did was say, okay, look, I've freed up time from these agents, so now I'm going to change their role so that they also have some responsibility for customer relationship building.
Yeah.
And because they have more time, they have the ability to elevate their interactions and their relationship with those customers in a positive way that dramatically changes the experience for those customers and improves, the overall CSAT. So it's a simple shift, but it's a simple shift in the way they think about it too, right? It's not I'm getting rid of a bunch of people that's going to save me money. It's, in fact, I can build a better relationship with my customers so I can grow my business faster and penetrate that customer more deeply because they have a closer relationship with me because of that.
100%. It's an abundance mindset around the fact of like, okay, and now, not to say that there's not ever going to be cost cutting or team reduction, etc. with certain things. That's not the point. Absolutely, that happens. But the idea is, how do we build out this technology that enables us as a team to do 10 times? We're still the same team, but now we're doing 10 times more, right, than what we were. We might be doing 10 times the revenue, 10 times the output, but we're still the same team. Our roles may have shifted, things may have changed, but suddenly we've got that ability. And I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, but around customer expectations. Customer expectations are just continually growing. And I know for a long time, there's always been this B2B and B2C, right? And B2B is learning from B2C and it's always behind, etc. But I think that gap is closing. It always is. And as technology is, it's just an expected thing, right? It's like, oh, well, we can do this. Why can't you do this, right? It should be pretty simple. And it almost seems sometimes, at least from my experience, where people expect more of the B2B space. Like, you're a company, you've got more at your disposal, right? Like, you should be able to do this better than what can happen in a B2B, a B2B environment. And I think there's a lot of businesses that are not recognizing that shift and are still so hard on down the traditional line and are just not investing at all in digital, and I'm completely missing the point. And what I was having a conversation with someone a couple of weeks ago about this very specific thing, and we were talking about AI, but I was talking about it saying, I think things like AI, if you're 2 years behind, it's going to take you 5 years to catch up, right? It's not just that you're it's not just that you're 2 years behind. It's an exponential thing. It's growing exponentially, and it doesn't mean that you should, as for example a consumables business or a wholesaler or something, that you should be out there doing this wild AI strategy. It's not the point. But if you're not embracing this innovation mindset, this digital first mindset, where it's like, okay, are we going to be the leaders in the industry, or are we going to be the followers? I think that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Well, and we talk about B2B and B2C, and some of the innovation, I think, has been driven from B2C up simply because we have a more granular view of the customer. But I think the fallacy there is that B2B and B2C, I don't know about you, but I'm B2B, but I sell to people.
Yeah,
I'm
100%.
not selling to a company. I'm selling to the individuals that I interact with and have a relationship with, that understand the value I could bring to them and want to use my service. So I think we have to think of it more in those terms when we think about the relationship and the customer experience, because it's those individuals, that team that's making those decisions, and thus those need to be taken into account as you build out this approach.
100%. And I was having a conversation with a client about this a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, but it was around the fact of, it's like, but B2B's got a longer buying cycle, a longer sales process, and we've got multiple buyers, multiple stakeholders. I was like, yeah, absolutely. But again, you're still thinking about this in the wrong way. How do we take the fact that, okay, they are all absolutely things for your specific business, your industry, and B2B in general, but for you and in your world, Now, how do we make that easier for them? How do we use technology to deliver a proposal to every single stakeholder and track that, but make it easier? And maybe we tailor that proposal to each different stakeholder, and it's not just in a hard format. Maybe it's a digital one. We're differentiating ourselves. How do we just use technology to our advantage? It's not about using it for the sake of using it. It's about using it to our advantage. And then it's like, okay, then we talk about differentiation. Then when you're going to land that big B2B contract, that 5-year contract for supplying or whatever it is, it's like, okay, what makes you different? Everyone else says they've got great customer service. They've got this, they've got 50,000 SKUs. They've got, 1 day lead time, whatever else. But what makes you different aside from that? It's like, okay, we've got this technology. This is what we use. This is who we are as a brand. Suddenly that is your differentiation. It's not just, we've built a website, a portal, AI, we've built this operation software, whatever it is for the sake of doing it. It is suddenly that's what makes us who we are. It's our differentiator. And so, yeah, I think it's a massive one for teams, and something I'm extremely passionate about, trying to get people to see that you can't just start a project like this with an end in sight, if that makes sense. Like, there is no end. It's continuous improvement, and it affects the whole part of the business. Now, what would you say? We've talked about the research part of it. What your experience? You've had a lot of experience here, and what would your experience be, and what would you share as to other parts of that aside from the research, where these, let's just call them digital initiatives, modernization projects, overall go wrong? What are some of the key points you see?
Well, I think the biggest, or at least the first one I'd think about, is the people involved in this, and how am I impacting those people? And that goes back to this idea of intentional change management as a part of your process, and really, talking about and making sure people understand that we're not doing these projects to eliminate your job. We're doing these projects to change your job in a positive way and change the business in a positive way. So offer retraining, offer, ways for them to move up or move into different roles, or, because there will be job displacement. I mean, we'd be fooling ourselves to say that that's never going to happen. Of course it is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's almost always there's a path if you can build it for them and offer it to them. Now, some people won't take the path. That's fine. That's their choice. That's not that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility as a business is to offer them that way to shift and learn and grow. And yep, sometimes it won't be a good fit for one or the other of you, and so you have to part companies. But in the end, the more you do that, the more you communicate, the more they understand the vision, the more they understand where they're going, then the more likely you are to have the kind of outcomes that you want. I mean, we've all seen system implementations go wrong, but wrong simply because we implemented this thing and nobody used it. Why? Well, because you didn't do the foundational work up front to get the people to be with you as you went through that process. And I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes. And then I guess the other thing that always jumps out to me is it's kind of the old Stephen Covey thing: begin with the end in mind. But your point, I think, is really important. Begin with the end in mind, but it's incremental. It's incremental improvement. So I have an end in mind. I get that. I move to the next end in mind, right? It's a continuous improvement process, and it's in chunks. It's in manageable chunks, and you build out all the things around that you need: the data, the tools, the training, all those things. But it continues as you go through your business cycle, and goes off into the future as you continue to be competitive and improve your business.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's, you talked about that change management, people management as part of these projects. A great point you make, and I'd add a couple of comments to it, and probably split it into two parts. There's another point to it, in my opinion, which is the people leading the project also need to have the capability and technical capability to actually do it. So many projects go wrong where it's just people who are leading the project or running the project do not have the capability. They might think they do or want to, but when in reality they don't. And there's technology decisions, or there's other decisions that are made that simply are just like, they end up it's technical debt to a degree, but you don't realize until later, and it's like, oh, we're too far into this. We've sunk too much money into it. It's too late. And then on the point you made around getting the team on board and all that, I totally agree. And I think a large portion of this comes back to that research part that we discussed earlier, because there's one point where we might implement the right solution with the team and they don't take it up because we haven't trained them, we haven't spoken to them, etc. Or we might implement the wrong solution and go, oh, why are they not doing? Well, what's going on? And it's like, well, it's not even useful, right? Like, you haven't spoken to us. It's not what we need, and you think it's what we need, but it's not what we need. And it's a massive problem. And I think a large part of it, as you've said as well, comes back to, can we get a plan in place? Can we get a strategy in place? Begin with the end in mind, but we know that we're going to learn things along the way. We know that we're going to improve. We're going to adapt our strategy and change here and there, and it will improve as we go. Basically,
I mean, hopefully it'll improve as we go. I guess the long-term answer is, if it doesn't improve as you go, eventually it won't matter. So that's a negative way to think of it, but in the end,
absolutely. And the biggest thing about it is that we can adjust our strategy on the fly. Now, obviously, these big decisions, we shouldn't be making wild decisions, just going, oh, we'll change that on the fly and we'll learn from that, etc. Because we know that, as we've just discussed, some things have long-term consequences. But we get the big rocks right, then we can adjust the finer details on the run, and we will learn from that as an agile approach. I think it's been a great discussion around all sorts of things, and I appreciate your time. You've certainly shared a lot of experience with me that I learned a lot, so I appreciate your discussion as well. I do have a couple of questions I ask every guest at the end of each episode. So before we get into that, do you have any final comments or anything that you want to say before we jump into those final questions?
No, I mean, I think we've touched on a bunch of different subjects, and I think that probably the biggest thing that all of this has been tied to is this idea of you're in control of this. You need to build it out and and approach this in a very process oriented way that looks at what you're trying to accomplish and talks about bringing your people, bringing your process, bringing your tools, bringing your data infrastructure to the point that we can do those things and continuously move through the business. So it's really, I overuse the word intentional, but on purpose, right? Because that's where I see companies go wrong most often, is they go into something to do it because we should do it, not because we know what it's going to do if we do it. And that's a mistake. That's a problem.
100% agree with you. Don't implement technology. Don't implement something because, quick, we need to do something, right? If you don't,
we got to have some of that generative AI. I don't know what it does, but we got to have it.
Absolutely. It's failed from the start. So I appreciate that. Well, the first question of the finale is what's one thing you believe businesses are not paying enough attention to right now that will be critical in the next 5 years?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to talk about that question without using something around AI, because I think that even though we are talking about it maybe too much in some ways, I don't know that we're looking at it in the right way yet. And that's broad conversation. That's a broad statement. Some companies are doing great. I mean, I'm not saying that they aren't, but at the same time, I see a lot of companies just going, either putting your head in the sand. Oh no, we don't have any of that. We're not doing it. Or they're adopting things in the manner that I just mentioned before. Those kind of like, I got to have this thing. I got to have this thing. I don't know what it does. We got to have this thing. And I feel like over the next 5 years, it's going to be really, really critical to enable your processes using all of these different technologies, not just generative AI, but traditional AI, machine learning, predictive analytics, all those other things that we've had for years, but we're using more and more now. And then I guess the last bit of that is, and remember that we're moving to a place where the conversational user experience is redefining the way we interact with systems. And that's going to change everything for people It's, it's the capability to talk naturally with your data, to talk naturally with your systems, and have them function in that, in that world that is considerably different than the way we operate today.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The second one is, what legacy do you want to leave in your industry, and how do you hope your work will influence or shape the future?
Yeah, it is something I think about a lot. And I think, you have to look to where are your strengths. And for me, I feel like the biggest thing that I've seen through my whole tech career is I'm a translator. I'm the guy who can take the tech and make it simple enough and interesting enough and usable enough for the business side of the business to understand it and figure out how they're going to use it and improve themselves. So if I had a superpower, that would be it. The capability to make things simple and straightforward and understand the business value of that to the business side while, understanding the technology and its constraints.
Yeah, I totally understand, and I relate to that because I feel the same way kind of about my role as well. Is that, okay, we can speak on the tech side, discuss that with the team, and we know the constraints of that. But then I think most importantly is, how do you distill that, dumb that down without without belittling the teams that we're working with, but basically make it, simplify it, right, and explaining business value, right? Okay, here's what we can do with that. Here's how you can get that back. So I think that's brilliant. And then the final one is, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career?
Well, there's probably a lot of personal things that I won't bring up here that I would tell myself to do and definitely not do. But I think if you go back to this really basic principle, and I have two daughters, and I've shared this with them repeatedly, is and I think this is hard when you're younger to understand that if you're doing the thing you really love doing right now, then you're going to be successful. You're going to be able to be, to embrace your own passions, and you will, love what you're doing now. And when that shifts, because you change, you will change, but you can continue to do those things that you have passion for and that you love, and you don't have to. There's no traditional path that you have to follow. You can continue to do that, and it may look from the outside like, holy man, this guy had no idea what he was doing, and maybe that was true. But at the same time, I would say I had the capability to see that this was a thing I loved, and I continued to do that until I wanted to go in some different direction. And all those things are okay, and I don't know that I would have accepted that when I was 20.
Yeah,
I wouldn't. I would have pushed back on it because I would have been like, no, I don't know what it is, but I got to have a plan. And your plan can be a little different than you think, I guess.
yeah, no, I think it's great advice, and I appreciate that. So, thanks once again, Michael. Appreciate you coming on. I've thoroughly enjoyed today's chat, and for anyone listening, you can check out all our other episodes on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere else where you get your podcasts. You can check Michael out on LinkedIn, and he's got his podcast as well. And we'll distribute this out as well, so you can check that out. There's also our learning center at Intuji.com that's got a lot of resource and a lot of great content as well. So thanks once again, Michael. Really appreciate your time and you coming on the podcast, and no doubt we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the invitation and really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael.